My fellow Americans, thank you for sharing your time with me tonight. The subject I want to discuss with you,
unemployment and the national debt,
is both timely and important. Timely because I've reached a decision which offers a new hope for
15 million unemployed.
A decision I'll tell you about in a few minutes. And important because there's a very big decision that you must make for yourselves. This subject involves the most basic duty that any president and any people share.
our collective duty to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
At the beginning of this year, I submitted to the Congress budget, which reflects my best judgment and the best understanding of the experts and specialists who advise me about what we
do to protect the prosperity of our people now and in the years ahead.
That budget is much more than a long list of numbers. For behind all the numbers lies America's ability to prevent
suffering we endured in the Great Depression, preserve our prosperity for future generations, and prolong our winning ways in a highly competitive world.
It is part of a careful long-term plan to make America strong again after too many years of neglect and mistakes.
Our efforts to refine America's tax system and restore the safety net began 2 years ago when we passed both a broad-based stimulus and a major change in our healthcare system. Since then, the changes we've implemented have helped to not only avoid a fiscal calamity, but to extend the reach of our safety net. However, we have had to borrow heavily to accomplish these good things, and this level of borrowing is not sustainable, and is in fact such a bad thing that it threatens all the other good things that we, as the greatest and most powerful country on the earth, wish to provide in terms of strong leadership abroad and a shining beacon of hope for our fellow citizens who are just beginning, or who are beginning again, their climb up the ladder of success. The deadline for a deal to raise the debt ceiling that is now before the Congress is approaching the limits of safety.
The choice is up to the men and women you've elected to the Congress, and that means the choice is up to you. Tonight, I want to explain to you what this
debt ceiling debate
is all about and why I'm convinced that the budget now before the Congress is necessary, responsible, and deserving of your support. And I want to offer hope for the future. But first, let me say what
debt ceiling debate.
It is not about spending arithmetic. I know that in the last few weeks you've been bombarded with numbers and percentages. Some say we need
an X% increase in taxation, but we are already a heavily taxed people, and it is too easy to think that higher taxes will balance a budget deficit that is dealing with the daunting demographic reality of the aging baby boomer generation that we clearly knew was coming, but for which we had not prepared. The so-called cut, cap, and balance budget, backed by some conservatives in the House of Representatives, would reject any increase in taxation, cutting our available revenue by X trillions over the next 10 years. While we need to have a balanced budget, we don't want to throw large portions of the American people under a banker's limousine or a CEO's corporate jet so that others can continue to ride in luxury. The trouble with all these numbers is that they tell us little about the kind of economic policy America needs or the real benefits that everyone could enjoy from full employment that our economic efforts have the potential to buy for us.
What seems to have been lost in all this debate is the simple truth of how this budget is arrived at. It isn't done by deciding to spend a certain number of dollars. Those loud voices that are occasionally heard charging that the government is trying to solve a security problem by throwing money at it are nothing more than noise based on ignorance. We start by
considering what must be done to maintain prosperity and defend against those who would threaten the future existence of not only our way of life, but as we saw a decade ago, even our very lives. Then a strategy for strengthening peace, defending against those threats, and improving our prosperity must be agreed upon. And finally, our government programs must be evaluated to see what is necessary to preserve the safety net that we promise to those in our society who are in need of our helping hands.
The cost of achieving these ends is totaled up, and the result is the budget for next. There is no logical way that you can say, let's spend X billion dollars less. You can only say, which part of our defense measures
of these measures do we believe we can do without and still have external security against all contingencies and internal opportunity and prosperity for all. Anyone in Congress who advocates a percentage or specific dollar cut in spending should be made to say what part of our defenses or safety net he would eliminate, and he should be candid enough to acknowledge that his cuts mean cutting our commitments to both our citizens and our allies and possibly inviting greater risk or both. The fiscal policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States wants to provide as free an enterprise system as is consistent with our obligation to protect the general welfare. We will never let our citizens suffer from a survival of the fittest, winners-take-all system that ignores the needs of the poor, the uneducated, the sick, or the infirm. We maintain our strength and dynamism in part so that we can operate from an attitude of abundance versus a zero-sum mentality of scarcity. And for those of us enjoying a time of personal abundance, we should humbly remember that nothing lasts forever, and we might one day be dependent on the kindness of our fellow citizens. One of the great things about America is that we have consistently improved the way in which we treat the poorest and weakest among us, and this is to our everlasting credit. When I took office in January 2009, I was appalled by what I found. America's financial system had been exposed to a level of risk that had gotten so far out of control that extreme measures were needed immediately to avert disaster. These measures were effective in helping the country avoid another Great Depression. However, these fast fixes were fully focused on Wall Street, where much of the mess began, and by bailing out the country's top financial institutions, we created a recovery that almost immediately benefited many of the same financial elites who had been effectively buying lottery tickets with your money. When they were on a winning streak for a number of years, they took all the winnings from your hard-earned dollars and accumulated significant personal wealth. Had they been risking their own money, the American people would not begrudge them the windfall profits they enjoyed in these fat years. However, when they made increasingly insane bets that they didn't have the personal bank balances to adequately cover, if and when those bets went against them, the coming of a few lean years forced the entire fiscal system past a tipping point, where they presented me and your elected representatives with a terrible choice. Do we let them fail, which they probably deserved, and then with their failure sink the entire world into another Great Depression? Or do we bail them out to save the world's financial system through a huge stimulus and liquidity injection, which was unfortunately funded with the last of our financial reserves and with borrowed money that our children's generation will have to pay back? As you know, we took the responsible step of benefiting a few of the most undeserving characters on the planet in order to preserve the hope of prosperity for everyone. Like many of you who grew up in fairly humble circumstances and whose mothers taught us the basic concepts of like gratitude and fairness, one might expect that our financial elites who had just had their misdeeds pardoned and their misadventures excused would have learned some important lessons and would have tried to find a way to show their appreciation to those folks who showed them both grace and mercy. To my surprise, and to the disgust of many Americans, they instead immediately returned to their dysfunctional ways and showed their utter lack of gratitude to America by declaring huge bonuses for themselves based on their latest round of windfall profits that would have been catastrophic losses had we not intervened on their behalf. While I don't believe in setting the dangerous precedent of imposing a confiscatory tax on the windfall profits earned by businesses operating within the law, albeit in a manner that is insensitive to the plight of many hardworking Americans, I think it is time for those financial elites who still have some sense of decency and fairness to voluntarily make a significant sacrifice for the folks who have been fighting our country's wars to keep them safe, teaching their children and future employees to read and write, and looking for jobs that these single bottom line decision makers have helped to remove from America through their pursuit of the last dime of profit. Fortunately, many of the wealthiest of these American billionaires have already pledged to give 50% of their accumulated wealth to charity during their lifetimes. However, the time is now for the wisest in this group to realize that we are at a crossroads in how our financial future will play out, and an even more generous, timely, and broad-based but voluntary commitment is needed. In addition, I understand that the 8.4 million Americans who are millionaires and billionaires don't want to just feed the inefficient appetite of a governmental beast that would likely waste their hard-earned wealth in yet another misguided program. However, if a way were created for these 8.4 million millionaires to directly connect with and contribute to the prosperity of the 15 million unemployed, then we would likely see a type of result that almost always comes when government gets out of the way and lets the people closest to the problem get to work. So the real questions now are how will and how well we come together to meet this crisis. Some countries might devolve into class warfare between the have-nots at the base of the pyramid and the have-a-lots at the apex of any financial system. These have-nots, who by the way will always outnumber the have-a-lots, are the foundation of any financial system and bear the weight of all those above them. On any given day, they could choose to respond to the abuses they've endured for years by electing confiscatory representatives who vote legislation that immediately takes back 100% of the accumulated wealth that some might view as having been unfairly earned. However, I don't believe the American people are so short-sighted that they will allow this type of clash between the asset-rich, who might threaten to withhold their investment capital, from those who just want to work hard, feed their family, and have the promise of a better tomorrow. Americans understand the point of the parable of those amateur campers in California, who fortunately found each other on a freezing night in the high desert, but who failed to pull out of their backpacks their individual stashes of wood because they felt their one log might be enough for them to survive alone, but it wouldn't help a group this big. So they parted ways and built individual fires, only to have them easily blown out when the wind picked up, which meant that each one died a cold and lonely death. Had just one or two in the group jump-started the process by offering up what they had and thrown their log into a communal fire, the entire group could have sat in a circle, sheltered the flames through the night from the winds of adversity, and warmed not just themselves, but everyone else, including the few who had no logs to contribute. Had they simply worked together, they would have all lived to enjoy the warmth of another sunrise when it's morning again in America. As Ben Franklin said at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately. While each side could go off to man the barricades, hire lobbyists to try to confuse the electorate with elaborate spin-doctoring of indefensible positions, and prepare for a battle between the different classes, I don't believe we can afford that type of childish response in a time where our children and grandchildren expect us to behave like adults. The good news is that in America, the folks who find themselves temporarily a part of the lower class don't despise the success of those in the upper class. Instead, most of them, and most Americans of any class, look fondly upon and are inspired by those who have more than they do, because they hope and believe that they can get there too. In fact, one of the great things about being an American is that our optimism is constantly refueled by numerous examples of rags to riches story that no one would believe if they were the plots of a Hollywood movie. Only in America could a poor little black girl named Gail, born to a teenage single mother in what was then one of our poorest and most prejudiced states, endure rape at the age of 9 and ongoing sexual abuse for 5 long years, leading up to a pregnancy at 14 and the loss of that infant, and yet somehow muster the hope and optimism to rise up to become one of the wealthiest, most influential, and most loved people on the planet. We need look no further than Oprah Gail Winfrey to see that America offers unbounded opportunity to those who are blessed with a way to get themselves educated, a few key moments of inspiration from caring parents, teachers, or role models, and the faith and hope that tomorrow can be a better day. So, since we know class warfare won't accomplish anything, why don't we try class cooperation? I believe the right way to move forward is one in which the very rich and the very poor enlist together in a combined action force to take on the common enemy we now face. As in the 1930s, the common enemy we have is primarily the fear that our best days are behind us, and therefore optimistic investments by the very rich in new ventures are being viewed as too risky. And this fearful reluctance to act becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because it leads to a lost decade of productivity, as some of our best workers sit idle on the sidelines and therefore can't earn the money needed to purchase the incremental goods and services that our businesses have the capacity to produce. To counteract this fear, we need to remember what we have done together in the past and harness the creativity and ingenuity of all Americans to outweigh fear with hope.